We have covered most of the US states in Fallout and what happened to them. We also took a look at countries outside of the US and all of their many mentions. But this time, we wanted to get down and personal with it. This time, we look at all the pre-war cities talked about in the entire series. What was going on in them before the bombs fell, during, and of course, after. In the other videos, we brought up pretty much any place that had any mention. So like if a napkin on the ground had the name of a city and a state, well then we put it in the video. Not this time though. Some people enjoy that, but I think most of you want the meat and potatoes, so that's what we're going for in this one. We aren't going to cover any cities that only have one-off mentions or odd things like that. We want to give you guys better information and the fun stuff, of course. But even having said that, there are still a ton of cities that have some good lore. So many, in fact, that this is just the first part of a two-part series. Next week will be the second part, so stick around for that one. One last thing, because there are so many, we're only covering the broadest and most basic aspect of these cities. You could easily make a longer video than this one just on Las Vegas itself, if you went into all the little details. Anyways, keep that in mind and enjoy. Before the war, Ashton was a small but strategically vital city in the American Southwest, near the border of California and Nevada. It sat alongside its neighbor, Hopeville, and together they housed multiple Army-owned nuclear missile bases. Also, these cities, Ashton and Hopeville, only exist in the Fallout universe. Just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. Each base contains silos full of ICBMs, part of the pre-war ballistic defense network. On October 23, 2077, the bombs fell, and Ashton burned with the rest of the world. What's ironic is that the missiles sitting beneath the city never launched. Nearly 200 years later, Ashton saw a second life. A hardy group of settlers formed a small community near the ruins, alongside Hopeville. They called themselves the Divide. Some saw it as the beginnings of a new nation rising from the ashes of the old world. Their location along a sparse but active trade route made Ashton and Hopeville a crucial link between the Mojave Wasteland, the east, and the new California Republic to the west. The NCR used this route to supply and reinforce its hold on the Hoover Dam, and that caught the attention of Caesar's Legion, who tried and failed to sever that connection. Even with all the Legion raids, the settlement endured, until tragedy came from an unexpected source. The very courier who had helped the community grow was hired by the NCR to deliver a package retrieved from Navarro. Neither the NCR nor the courier knew that this package contained active nuclear launch codes. When it was brought home to the Divide, it awakened the dormant missiles beneath Ashton and Hopeville. One by one, the warheads detonated, tearing the ground apart in a chain of explosions so violent they reshaped the land itself. Highways split, buildings twisted into skeletal frames, and the earth cracked open. The destruction left Ashton a graveyard of metal and stone. Ruined overpasses hang broken above streets littered with rusting cars. Makeshift camps cling to the wreckage inhabited by the marked men. They're the ghoulified remains of both NCR troops and Legion soldiers who were caught in these blasts. Exposure to the Divide's brutal storms and radiation has left them with a constant state of slow decay. Their survival is definitely more a curse than it is a blessing. When the courier returned in 2281, a single missile silo remained intact. What happens with that missile is up to the courier.
Founded in 1838, Beckley was a coal town through and through. For generations, its mine was the heart of the community, powering both the local economy and its identity. When the mine eventually closed, the city tried to preserve its heritage with a museum, the Beckley Coal Mine Exhibit, celebrating the industry that had built it. But by the late 21st century, Beckley wasn't just a quiet historical stop. It was the birthplace of Shannon Rivers, famed for voicing the mistress of mystery, and home to one of the most heated pre-war rivalries in Appalachia. The sandwich shop showdown between Sal's Grinders and Big Papa Mo's Lip Smackin' Sandwich Shack. Life in Beckley, however, was far from peaceful. Like much of Appalachia, the city became a flashpoint in the bitter labor disputes of the era. Workers clashed with corporate giants Atomic Mining Services and Hornwright Industrial, who pushed to replace human miners with robots. Protests escalated into riots, and by the time of the Great War, the situation was volatile enough for the National Guard to step in. Assisted by Robco's strikebreaker robots and armed with hallucinogen gas, their orders were simple and brutal: pacify or kill the protesters. When the bombs fell, Beckley's unrest froze in place. The minor blockade still stood long after the war, particularly on the north side of town. Raiders eventually took advantage of the defenses, using them to fortify their own positions, but they too were killed or driven out by 2102. The strikebreaker robots never left. To this day, Eyebots, Protectrons, Mr. Gutsies, and a Robo-Brain patrol the streets, while feral ghouls haunt the rooftops. Most of the buildings are destroyed or boarded up, but a few landmarks remain. Sal's Grinders still stands, its entrance leading to the upper levels of town. Up on the rooftops, wooden shacks left from the pre-war days cling to the edges, connected by bridges. West of town lies the Beckley Coal Mine Exhibit Public Workshop, a cue to the city's past. Eastward is a rest stop with scavengeable supplies, and down the intersection, boarded up storefronts mark the scars of Beckley's decline. Loot is sparse, and the streets can be dangerous. Beckley in Fallout 76 mirrors its real-world counterpart in West Virginia, right down to the coal mine exhibit. But in the wasteland, it's more than a preserved piece of history since it's frozen from the chaos before the bombs, where corporate greed, worker defiance, and military force collided, and where the ghosts of that conflict still walk beside the machines built to crush it. Pulling away from Beckley's barricaded streets and strikebreaker patrols, the road winds north through the Appalachian Hills until the landscape softens and we get away from the hellhole of Ash Heap. The air here feels different, calmer, almost untouched, and for good reason. We've reached Berkeley Springs, one of the few places in West Virginia that escaped the direct wrath of the bombs. Before the war, Berkeley Springs was pride of the Eastern Spa Circuit, famous for America's first spa in the state park. It was a haven for the wealthy who snapped up mansions and high-end apartments and poured their money into local businesses. But affluence didn't bring grace. The service sector flourished, but so did entitlement. When the spa raised its prices to survive the collapsing economy, the idle rich, cruising around in fast cars and living in luxury, cried foul. When the bombs fell, the spa town's untouched status became both a blessing and a curse. Refugees poured in, and the local clinics strained under the weight of an unending influx of sick and wounded. By late October 2077, supplies were vanishing faster than they could be replaced. Even an Army vertibird drop couldn't turn the tide. By November, the situation was desperate. Fusion cores for backup generators were being scavenged from abandoned cars, and every bandage, sterile instrument, and dose of medication was accounted for. On November 6th, the clinic had nothing left. 5 days later, raiders stormed in, killing the 2 soldiers left on ground, gunning down a nurse who resisted, and taking what remained. The surviving staff and patients abandoned the town soon after, heading south to Charleston. In Fallout 76, Berkeley Springs is a mid-sized settlement cut by a narrow canal and anchored by South Washington Street. Shops and boarded storefronts line the main road, including Dr. Barnaby's pharmacy locked behind a high-security terminal and worth the effort for its stash of chems. Across the canal sits a brick-built city hall reinforced with turrets, and beyond that, the beauty and spa salon. Residential streets branch off from the main drag, dotted with partially destroyed houses and intact mansions, some hiding workshop terminals and loot. In the wasteland, the beauty of Berkeley Springs hides its scars. The water still flows, the spa buildings still stand, but the town that once catered to the rich now belongs to the scavengers, ghouls, and survivors who can hold it, if only for a while.
Boulder City was originally built in 1931 by the Bureau of Reclamation and 6 companies. It was a carefully planned, government-run company town to house workers building the Hoover Dam. It wasn't just a place to crash, but a tiny monitored community. Alcohol and gambling were banned, since it was the Prohibition era and right next to the rowdy Las Vegas. And anyone who wanted to set up shop or visit needed permits. As far as when the bombs were falling, we know that Boulder City was pretty much left unscathed. It just became a little frontier town like most of the outskirts cities in Nevada. Well, at least for a little while. But what eventually flattened Boulder City wasn't nukes, but a product of post-war factions. During the first Battle of Hoover Dam, the New California Republic lured the toughest Legion soldiers into Boulder City, which had been rigged with explosives. As a result, the town was blown to bits to crush Caesar's Legion's offensive. Lieutenant Monroe puts it plainly.
The sharpshooters and the Rangers picked off the Legion's veterans from a distance, and the rest of the Legion just rushed on in. Then boom.
After that boom, Boulder City was basically a ghost town. Most buildings were rubble save for a few like the concrete mixing yard near the train station and the Bighorn Saloon. What was left became a pit stop for caravans and NCR troops, especially since the saloon served as a rough and ready hangout. And concrete, when it was available, was vital for building fortifications, but the supply chain wasn't smooth sailing. Quarry Junction, where limestone came for the concrete, got overrun by deathclaws, which basically stopped the deliveries cold. That left the town idle and just dusty ruins. You can wander through it now, and it's more memory than it is life.
Before the Great War, Bramwell was no ordinary small town in Appalachia. Once a modest community, it became a playground for the ultra-rich, transformed into a skyline of mega mansions that towered over the ash heap. These skyscraper-like estates housed Appalachia's wealthiest residents and pushed out regular citizens, cementing the town's reputation for exclusivity and excess. But opulence couldn't shield it from unrest. During the automation riots, disgruntled ex-miners led by O'Connor used stolen explosives to bring down one of these massive homes. The riots reflected the wider struggle across the region, as corporations and government forces tried to crush dissent from workers furious over being replaced by machines. When the bombs fell in 2077, Bramwell's wealthy elite scattered, abandoning their monolithic estates to the encroaching ash and soot from nearby Mount Blair. In the years after, the responders' fire breathers ventured into the area in search of survivors but found none. What they did recover was the excavator power armor intended for future operations. While Bramwell never appears as a marked in-game location in Fallout 76, its legacy lives on throughout the estates, the unfinished mansion along with the Appalachian monorail, and in terminal entries that chart its role as a symbol of pre-war wealth and post-war ruin. Today it stands in the Fallout lore as a place whose fall mirrored the collapse of the world itself.
Searchlight, Nevada in the Fallout universe was a small NCR military outpost and a residential town. It sat along the highway between the Mojave Wasteland and the NCR Heartland, acting as a rest stop and a minor hub for travelers and caravans heading east. The town also had a functioning church and civilian homes. On the military side, the NCR stationed a garrison here, along with support staff and families. Nothing about Searchlight was really flashy. NCR troops reported problems with supplies, but the base wasn't exactly high priority compared to places like Hoover Dam. Searchlight's disaster didn't happen in 2077. It came much later in 2281. A Legion infiltrator disguised as an NCR trooper smuggled in radioactive waste into the camp and sabotaged the base. The waste was spread around the area and released, bathing the town and the military installation in lethal radiation. It was fast and ugly. People were cooked from the inside out in minutes. Some died on the spot. Others turned into ghouls. The Legion called it a gift, and their plan worked perfectly, wiping out the NCR presence without a single Legion soldier having fired a shot. By the time the courier arrives, Camp Searchlight is a glowing graveyard. The streets are empty except for the wind and feral ghouls that wander around where soldiers used to stand guard, and the buildings are falling apart under the constant radiation. A handful of NCR survivors are holed up in a nearby church, and they're too scared and sick to leave. They can't even bury their dead without risking more contamination. The NCR presence is officially gone, and the Legion has no reason to occupy the site. It's basically unlivable. Searchlight went from being a nice pit stop to a cautionary tale about how in the Mojave War, the fight isn't always won with bullets. Sometimes it's won with a single dirty trick. We don't have any official in-universe details on what Canyon City, Oregon was doing before the Great War. There's no lore or no vault connections and no NCR or pre-war faction links. But we do know a little post-bombs, thanks to a little game called Fallout Tactics, which by the way is like canon-ish, so keep that in mind if we bring it up in this video. In Fallout Tactics, Canyon City appears as a post-war location under the control of the Calculator's forces during the Brotherhood of Steel's Midwestern campaign. The city is defended by robots and serves as one of the main battle zones in the game. Beyond that, the game gives no insight into the local population, history, or how it ended up being under robotic control. Once the Brotherhood defeats the defending forces, the city falls under their influence. That's the only confirmed post-war event tied to the name Canyon City in any Fallout media. Still, it's pretty nice to have something to chew on. We don't have any straight up pre-war history for Carbon. It's never shown or talked about. Also, what we do have takes place in Fallout Brotherhood of Steel, and unlike Tactics, this game is mostly regarded as non-canon, I believe. But during and after the war, we do have some stuff. Carbon is built on top of a massive crater caused by the Great War, so half of the old town actually fell into the earth when the nukes hit. So it's just that crater and that part of town that didn't collapse into it. This is where Fallout Brotherhood of Steel steps in. Carbon is a small farming town in the game. People grow crops and raise Brahmin, the two-headed cows. There's a mayor there named Richard running things, but the Brotherhood sends in an initiate on a mission to find the paladins in the area. The town is split into chunks, east, west, north, and center, and the big crater that sits nearby. There's a bar there, the Atomic Diner, a warehouse, a mill, and the whole place is under constant threat from raiders. The initiate helps fight off attacks, rescues people, and even ends up replacing the mayor with the town doctor, Vidya. And that's pretty much the full story. After the bombs, Carbon becomes an average wasteland town under siege, with the Brotherhood's meddling in local politics, all in the Brotherhood of Steel timeline.
Charleston was the capital of West Virginia and one of the largest cities in Appalachia. It was a political and industrial hub and also a flashpoint for unrest. Governor Evans, a staunch ally of corporate interests, championed automation despite fierce union opposition, with resistance led by figures like Senator Sam Blackwell. The city became the heart of Appalachia's automation push, even as protesters for workers' rights erupted across its streets. Hornwright Industrial, headquartered here, stood as both a symbol of economic aspirations and the target of bitter labor disputes. When the Great War came, Charleston was spared the worst of the destruction. Its survival allowed it to serve as the heart of Appalachian Reconstruction. An emergency government formed in the intact Capitol building, working alongside the first responders to restore order. But the flood of refugees soon overwhelmed the city's ability to provide aid. Denying help to desperate survivors from Pleasant Valley Ski Resort and Top of the World proved costly. Those same survivors, led by David Thorpe, became one of Appalachia's most feared raider gangs. On Christmas morning in 2082, Thorpe's retaliation came in the form of a mini-nuke that destroyed the Summersville Dam, unleashing a flood that devastated Charleston and wiped out much of the responders' resources and people. In the years that followed, Charleston was largely abandoned, its mud-choked streets and toppled buildings left to the wild. Super mutants, scorched, snallygasters, and other monsters roamed the ruins where the state's government once stood. The fire breathers used the gutted city as a training ground, headquartered in the Charleston Fire Department, while remnants like Wade Airport, the Charleston Train Yard, and AVR Medical Center hint at the city's former scale. Today, only one human resident, Nash, calls Charleston home. Lonely bastard. Clarksburg is one of those small Appalachia towns in Fallout 76 that really sells the idea of this used to be a place people lived. In the pre-war world, it was every bit a functioning city. Shopping, community, all of that in the heart of what became the Toxic Valley. You would expect the typical grocery store, pharmacy, post office, church, hardware store, gun shop, and even a private shooting club, and your expectations would be met. All the building blocks of small town life were there. Tragically, everything changed. The region was torn apart by man vs. robot protests before the bombs fell. And when the Great War hit, the Toxic Valley's industrial runoff poisoned more than just the air. The water turned sickening, and slowly the population drained away. Most fled to Morgantown for safer water and more stable ground. For a long time, only 3 souls remained: Jill, Andy, and Cooper Lou. Then, as fate would have it, a Yaogoy attacked. Only Cooper lived, and even she eventually decided Clarksburg was no place to stay and set out for survivors elsewhere. Eventually, the town didn't stay empty. Raiders showed up holding the shanty town center with makeshift defenses. By 2102, they were gone, routed, or dead. A year later, a doctor set up camp just outside Clarksburg, taking soil samples to evaluate how deep the toxins ran. If you come across Clarksburg today in 76, you're hit with a real sense of decay. What I enjoy is that Clarksburg is based directly on the real West Virginia town, and some of its buildings match real-world counterparts. The in-game theater mirrors the Robinson Grand Performing Arts Center, while the hardware store and factory buildings relay the old Standard Mill complex on Clark Street and North 6 in real Clarksburg. Clarksburg shows how fragile small-town life can be around Appalachia. It's not a city-turned-vault or a cynical raider base. It's a place where real families used to live, where community slipped away one poisoned well at a time. As a player, Clarksburg has a weird pull. It's kind of this creepy, busted town in the middle of BFE. You get to roam through the cracks of daily life before the bombs, piecing together journals like Cooper Lou's, learning who lived there, what they feared. In the grand tour of Fallout's world, Clarksburg matters because it brings us closer to the story of Appalachia as it slipped from civilization's edge. Not with grand events, but with quiet failure of the everyday.
Again, like a lot of these towns, it's pretty much radio silence. Fallout Tactics doesn't mention any nuclear attack or fallout affecting Coldwater. The game's focus is well after the war. Also, I forgot to mention that Tactics tends to change geography a little bit. Some places and towns aren't like they are in our universe. So once again, keep that in mind as well. Post-war though, Coldwater is a busted up settlement built on top of the old pre-war city's ruins. It's multi-layered, literally. The town split into levels or tiers like a little stack of neighborhoods that go up instead of out. It's known in the region for having a casino and a mix of humans and ghouls living there. The place gets overrun by a gang called the Red Stingers, who are criminals from Quincy who wear stolen Brotherhood of Steel armor and drive a stolen vehicle. How they did that is poison some Brotherhood paladins, steal their gear, and use it to take over the town. Then your Brotherhood squad, led by a character known as the Warrior, storms in. You fight through the tiers, save Adele Dudley, deal with the bandits, and then collect 3 sets of broken power armor to return to the Auditor General. That's pretty much all the post-war story Coldwater gets in official lore. After the bombs, Freeport shows up as the Brotherhood of Steel mission site in the Midwestern campaign. By this time, it's under the control of raiders who've been terrorizing the region. The Brotherhood sends the warrior and their squad to clear out the place. The fight takes you through fortified streets and heavily defended positions, with the raiders using every scrap of cover they can find. Once the Brotherhood secures the city, it becomes part of their growing territory in the Midwest. Fallout Tactics doesn't offer much beyond the battle itself. Unfortunately, there are no details about the surviving population or rebuilt industries or even the long-term role in the Brotherhood's plans. The only confirmed canon is that it was hostile territory taken by force and then folded into the Brotherhood's control, which is pretty much the entire game of Fallout Tactics.
This place was once a quiet, forested town along the Flatwoods River, known for its local motel, tavern, church, and the regional legend of the Flatwoods Monster. Entry signs proudly declared it the home of the Green Monster, a declaration to its folkloric claim to fame. In Vault Tech's pre-war projections, the town's survivability in a nuclear event wasn't promising. Its small size and limited resources made it very vulnerable. Still, Flatwoods was home to a tight-knit community, including Reverend Delbert Winters, a lifelong resident who served the congregation in the local church. Life here moved at a slower pace, far from the industrial conflicts consuming other parts of Appalachia. When the bombs fell, Flatwoods avoided direct destruction but faced the same chaos that gripped the rest of the region. The responders chose it as one of their first post-war outposts, using Winters' church as a hub to train volunteers, distribute food and water, and give survivors a purpose. Under Winters' guidance, the group taught skills as basic and vital as cooking after seeing people resort to eating raw, irradiated meat. But like many towns in the forest region, Flatwoods couldn't escape loss. Most of its residents perished or fled, leaving only scattered bodies and memories behind. By 2102, the only living inhabitants are Heather Ellis and her dog Chloe, working to revive the responders with the tools left in place. The town's streets remain largely intact, with the Green Country Lodge, tavern, Red Rocket Station, and community garden still standing. This was a community that once tried to rebuild, but now survives as little more than a waypoint for Vault 76 dwellers heading into the wider wasteland.
Before the bombs, Goodsprings was a small desert town in Nevada, and in the Fallout universe, it carried on much like it does in real life, just rural and off the beaten path. The game never tells us about a crazy pre-war twist like a secret vault or a weird experiment happening here. It was just a normal place that managed to avoid the big flashy targets on Nuke Day. Goodsprings wasn't hit directly. Its location away from major military or industrial sites kept it out of the blast zones, but that doesn't mean it came through untouched. Like the rest of the Mojave, it was caught in the wider environmental damage and resource collapse that followed, but it wasn't reduced to a crater or drowned in radiation. And in Fallout, that's about as lucky as you can get. Goodsprings kept going as a tiny, tight-knit settlement. By the events of Fallout New Vegas in 2281, it's still standing, with a handful of residents who know each other by name. There's Doc Mitchell, the town doctor, Trudy, who runs the Prospector Saloon, Easy Pete, who's a retired prospector, and of course a few others. The town gets pulled into the Courier's story right off the rip. Benny's crew tries to bury the Courier in a shallow grave here, and Doc Mitchell is the one who saves you. Depending on your choices, Goodsprings can either stay free and independent after a showdown with the Powder Gangers, or end up under their control. Either way, it's one of the rare settlements in Fallout that feels like a real community. It's alive and kind of thriving at this point. That is, unless some psycho with a head wound decides to switch things up. Where Great Bend shows up is in Fallout Tactics, long after the war. By the time the Brotherhood of Steel's Midwestern chapter reaches it, the city has turned into a heavily fortified base for the Beast Lords. These guys are a raider tribe that can control mutated animals and use them in combat, which sounds pretty badass, honestly. Great Bend is their stronghold, full of trained deathclaws, rad scorpions, and other wasteland creatures. The Beast Lords have walled off the city and set up watchtowers. Then they filled the streets with both human guards and animal patrols. The Brotherhood's mission here is to break that control. The warrior and their squad fight through both the Beast Lords and their creatures, then capture their leader and effectively end the Beast Lord threat in the region. After that, Great Bend falls under Brotherhood control, though the game doesn't go into detail about whether the civilian population remained or how the city was rebuilt. What is confirmed is that by the end of the mission, it stops being a Beast Lord capital and becomes another outpost in the Brotherhood's growing territory. And I'm sure you didn't see that one coming.
Founded in 1856 and celebrated as the birthplace of Mother's Day, Grafton grew into a major retail and industrial hub for north-central West Virginia. The creation of Grafton Dam bolstered both its infrastructure and tourism, which eventually rivaled and in some areas surpassed its steel production industry. By the 21st century, the city's economy was anchored by Grafton Steel, one of the largest mills in the region and a government-preferred war contractor. This status granted it license to crush labor laws and ignore environmental safeguards, devastating the local ecosystem and endangering workers. By mid-2077, toxic sludge fouled the waterways, injuries and deaths mounted, and demands to shut the mill down reached the governor's desk. Of course, only to be ignored. Surprise, surprise. In September, after months of sabotage and intimidation, workers launched a full strike, halting steel production and triggering federal surveillance for suspected communist activity. As the bombs fell, Grafton avoided immediate destruction, but not the slow death that followed. Automation had already crept into the city governance, with a mainframe installed to assist the mayor. After society collapsed, the AI assumed full control, becoming increasingly erratic as the toxic valley decayed around it. The responders established trading posts at the station and town hall, but the streets became dangerous, prowled by super mutants and other threats, like a big-ass monster named after the town. Once a thriving center of industry and community, Grafton is now a polluted ruin. Its toxic river a permanent scar from the corporate abuses of the past, and its mayor a glitch of how far the city has fallen. Survivors pass through, scavenging what they can, but the Grafton that celebrated Mother's Day and boomed with steel is long gone, replaced by a hollow shell haunted by its own history. Harpers Ferry at one point was a small but historically rich town whose tourism industry relied on its scenic location at the meeting of two big rivers. In the decades leading up to 2077, it became the epicenter of the Free States movement, a fiercely independent group skeptical of the government's vault program and determined to construct personal bunkers throughout the mire. While loyalists saw them as a paranoid conspiracy theorists, their presence rattled the local economy, driving away patriotic tourists. Tensions escalated as the Sino-American War intensified. The government began pressuring local business owners for the names of suspected Free States members, the clinic refused treatment to known affiliates, and by mid-year, the military was seizing property under charges of sedition. The bombs spared Harpers Ferry from immediate annihilation, and it briefly became a hub for reconstruction efforts. Refugees flowed into the town, straining its resources, and in 2078, Vault 94 extended an invitation to survivors. Suspicious of the vault's motives, Mayor Miranda Vaux sent an armed group to investigate, a decision that ended in catastrophe. Convinced the hospitality was a trap, the group massacred the vault's leaders and destroyed its GEC, triggering a nuclear explosion that further mutated the mire. Despite past tensions, the returning Free States aided in rebuilding, turning Harpers Ferry into a fortified trading post by 2084. That recovery, however, was short-lived. In 2086, the Scorched Plague swept through the town, killing many and forcing the Free States back into their bunkers. With the automated anti-air defenses eventually breached by Scorched Beasts, Harpers Ferry fell, its fortifications and armories abandoned. Clay, leader of the Free States, ordered all remaining survivors to abandon the area. Today, the fortified hilltop, church-turned barracks, and scattered defenses are relics of a town that resisted both government oversight and the post-war chaos, but was ultimately undone by the very wasteland it fought to survive.
Henderson was home to Repcon Aerospace, a major pre-war company known for building rockets and experimenting with alternative fuels like plasma and fission-based power. This made Henderson one of the Mojave's hubs for cutting-edge tech, with the Repcon headquarters standing as its most recognizable landmark. The work being done there tied directly into the broader pre-war arms race, putting the city on the map in Fallout's alternate history. When the bombs fell, there's no recorded account of Henderson being directly targeted, but the survival of the Repcon building means it pretty much avoided a full-scale blast, which I feel is pretty surprising. I would have expected it to be a target. It may have still been hit by shockwaves and fallout, but enough of the structure and its system remained intact to function decades later. The Repcon headquarters became a strange time capsule. Long after the city around it had faded into the wasteland, the building's automated security systems, sentry bots, and facial recognition tech still patrolled the empty halls. Decades of abandonment left it dusty and quiet, but in true Fallout fashion, the pre-war tech stubbornly kept running. Repcon is kinda known for that. Anyways, that building is pretty much the only interesting thing left in Henderson. Hopeville, like we talked about earlier, was a thriving military hub and also an exclusive to the Fallout universe. This city doesn't actually exist in real life. It was a major missile base for the United States, loaded with silos and stockpiles of nuclear weapons. The town itself grew around the base, with soldiers, their families, and civilian workers all living nearby. This made Hopeville more than just another California desert town, as it was a key piece of America's pre-war nuclear arsenal, with infrastructure and manpower dedicated to maintaining and potentially launching those missiles if war broke out. When the bombs fell, Hopeville didn't get hit in the first wave. Its downfall came later through a series of unfortunate events. The remaining nukes that were left underground ended up firing off thanks to the Courier and the NCR. Not on purpose, mind you, but it's a whole thing. The launch of its nuclear arsenal caused massive secondary detonations that devastated the surrounding area. The base and the town were obliterated in the process. Hopeville remained a dead zone, and by the events of Lonesome Road, it's a ghostly, ash-choked ruin deep in the divide. The streets are buried in dust storms, buildings are collapsed, and the old missile silos stand like tombstones. Surviving structures are rigged with traps and home to hostile marked men, which are of course the ghoulified survivors from the divide's endless storms, usually the soldiers from both the NCR faction and Caesar's Legion. The place is so unstable that even walking through it risks triggering dormant warheads buried underneath the rubble. Obviously there's a hell of a lot more to this place, but if we covered everything in the divide, that video would be just as long as this entire video. Just reminding you guys that we really are just covering the basics of all these places, because otherwise this thing would go on for days.
Founded in 1869 by Swiss and German immigrants, Helvetia was a thriving mountain village known for its skilled craftsmen, musicians, cheesemakers, and stonemasons. Its rich cultural traditions endured for over a century with the Fastnacht Day celebration, a colorful parade ending in the burning of an effigy of Old Man Winter, becoming a signature event. For outsiders like me, burning effigies sounds weird as shit, but you know what? I'd attend. To ease the workload, the town invested in Protectron robots, which doubled as a tourist draw for visitors eager to experience Helvetia's unique blend of European heritage and Appalachian charm. Even in the decades leading to the Great War, Helvetia maintained its identity as a cultural hub, with themed buildings, specialty shops, and restaurants preserving its old-world feel. Once the bombs fell, the town's tight-knit community held together for a time, but mounting pressures pushed it to the brink. When a Horizon Airlines jet crashed nearby, locals salvaged the wreckage to build a new settlement at Horizon's Rest. Not long after, Helvetia was abandoned entirely, likely due to the approach of the Reavers Raider gang. In the years since, the Scorched have claimed its streets, and the cult of the Mothman once used the church as a shrine, leaving behind a shadowed effigy in place of the altar. Today, Helvetia remains a blurry shadow of its former self. Huntersville was once a quiet, isolated West Virginia town on the verge of fading away. That changed in early 2075 when West Tech and the US government offered a rural development grant. Within months, Huntersville had a modern-day recycling system, new sewer lines, and a growing economy bolstered by the newly established West Tech Research Center on its outskirts. The townsfolk didn't ask too many questions about their secretive new neighbors, especially once money started flowing in. Even when West Tech began paying for testing rights to the local water supply, the promise of a brighter future seemed worth the trade. But that prosperity hid a dark truth. West Tech's improvements were a cover for contaminating Huntersville's drinking water with the forced evolutionary virus. By early 2076, the experiment's effects began to surface. Residents fell ill with a strange flu that caused hair loss, skin discoloration, and severe deformities. West Tech's doctors insisted it was nothing serious, convincing families to stay indoors while hazmat-clad soldiers enforced a strict quarantine. The reality was far worse. Huntersville was becoming the birthplace of Appalachia's first super mutants. As the mutations worsened, violence erupted. The 12th Mountain Division guarded the town, but their orders were to protect the experiment, not the people. When Sergeant Jake tried to expose what was happening, he was court-martialed and replaced with a far more compliant officer. By the time the bombs fell in October 2077, Huntersville was already a nightmare, a ghost town filled with violent, inhuman creations. In the decades after the war, the ruins of Huntersville became a battleground. Raiders avoided it knowing the water was poisoned, but the Enclave saw potential in reviving West Tech's work. By 2082, new generations of super mutants poured out of the area, clashing with the Responders and the Brotherhood of Steel. These tensions culminated in the bloody Battle of Huntersville in 2086, where the Brotherhood and Responders temporarily drove the mutants out, but at great costs. For those who died, well, their graves still lie just south of town, showing that victory never lasts. By 2102, the super mutants had reclaimed Huntersville once more, turning the birthplace of Appalachia's most infamous monstrosities back into their stronghold.
Jean was a tiny stop along Interstate 15 in Nevada, mostly known for its prison facility. In the Fallout universe, it stays the same. The Jean skydiving building and surrounding area served travelers and the nearby prison. It wasn't a major economic or military hub. It was just one of those small desert communities that existed because of the road and the infrastructure around it. There's no record of Jean being directly targeted, and its small size probably meant it wasn't high on anyone's list. If it did take any damage, it would have been from the shockwaves and fallout drifting from the strikes on bigger targets like Las Vegas or even Nellis Air Force Base. Whatever structures were there at the time seemed to have been damaged but not completely erased. Jean is little more than a ruin on the edge of the Mojave. The most notable landmark is the skydiving building, which is still there, but it's abandoned and looted. The NCR correctional facility that was built on the old prison site became home to the powder gangers after they staged a violent breakout. Jean itself has no active population or functioning community outside of the powder gangers, but I don't know if I would consider them a functioning community. Jefferson appears in Fallout Tactics as another Brotherhood of Steel mission. By this time, it's under the control of super mutants who have fortified the area. The Brotherhood sends a warrior to clear them out, turning the battle into a major fight for control of the city. Once the mutants are defeated, yep, you guessed it, Jefferson is now part of the Brotherhood of Steel territory. It's a tale as old as time at this point. Junction City shows up in Fallout Tactics as a mid-sized, self-reliant town in Kansas that flat out refused to buddy up with the Brotherhood of Steel. The place is run by Mayor John, and the townsfolk include characters like Casey the Mechanic and the bartender Angry Rick. They've got their own defenders, the Enforcers, and even a beat-up humanoid robot from the Calculator's forces. And that piqued the Brotherhood's curiosity, so they sent their squad to fetch the robot parts, and then recruit Casey after you patch up her sick dad. But the mayor only gives up the robot head if the Brotherhood protects them from Reaver attacks. The squad then wipes out the Reavers at their nearby base, gets the robot piece, and earns their trust enough to recruit Casey as a mechanic. The town stays independent, but now with a foot in Brotherhood territory. Kansas City was a major nuclear launch site. It had silos ready to fire, stocked with warheads meant to rain down destruction if things turned south. This wasn't a regular city, but a military backbone of America's pre-war firepower. When the bombs fell, Kansas City didn't escape unscathed. Its status as a missile site meant it was a target, and while the silos may have not been destroyed, the city around them ended up in ruins. The silo staff who survived the apocalypse wound up as ghouls, forming a little community in the center. They named their town Gravestone, built around the last intact nuke they called Plutonius, and they turned it into something kind of like a shrine. A little while later in Gravestone, Gamoran's super mutant army moves in and tries to take over. And then the Brotherhood of Steel shows up. Your squad defends the ghouls and fights off the mutants, and then takes Plutonius in return. They then use this later to bust into Vault Zero. So Kansas City goes from nuclear launch point to ruined idol's shrine to battlefield and strategic prize.
Lewisburg was more than just another West Virginia mining town. It was a community that blended small town charm with creative flair. Voted coolest small town USA in 2061, Lewisburg embraced rooftop gardens, colorful art exhibitions at the Serenity Road Art Gallery, and seasonal street festivals. The annual Spring Garden Festival transformed its streets into a celebration of flowers and fresh produce, even if residents sometimes had to wear gas masks to cope with the region's notoriously poor air quality. On the eve of the Great War, miners were striking along the town's southern edge. Voting was underway, and Halloween celebrations filled the streets with music, food stalls, and a sense of normalcy. In the years after the bombs fell, Lewisburg tried to keep that spirit alive. Survivors rebuilt into a small trading hub with market stalls running the length of the main road and rooftop greenhouses supplying food and flowers. But its festive atmosphere made it a target. Raiders struck during one Spring Garden Festival, taking to the rooftops and slaughtering townsfolk from above. Infamous figures like Bleeding Kate used the town as hunting ground, while others like the Order of Mysteries and Natasha Hunt made their last stand here. Lewisburg now is a haunting blend of beauty and ruin. Its art galleries and festivals streets now overrun by scorched, yet still bearing traces of the vibrant town that once made it the pride of Greenbrier County. Monongah was a struggling mining town deep in the Savage Divide, its economy buckling under a prolonged downturn in coal production. In April 2075, salvation seemed to arrive when Hornwright Industrial Mining Company swooped in with an offer: financial aid for the town in exchange for exclusive rights to the nearby Monongah mine. For a brief moment, prosperity returned. But the mine's centuries-old coal seams were nearly tapped out, and Hornwright's fleet of auto miners drained the last deposits with ruthless efficiency. By early 2076, the company was packing up. In one desperate night, a group of laid-off miners led by Earl Williams broke into the mine to steal supplies, only for the supervisor, Sykes, to seal them inside with explosives. The trapped miners resorted to cannibalism, and in the decades after the war, their twisted leader would become something far more horrifying: the Wendigo Colossus. Hornwright's payments to Monongah dried up in August 2077, sending the town into economic collapse just weeks before the bombs fell. Any remaining hope vanished as the Great War left Monongah abandoned to the elements. Today, the town sits in a small circle of cracked streets, split by a central road, its police station, church, and ruined homes now crawling with mole miners, liberators, and scorched. To the untrained eye, it's just another ghost town. But to those who know its story, Monongah is a place littered with fragments of deals that promise salvation yet deliver ruin.
After the bombs, Macomb shows up in Fallout Tactics as a dangerous, divided place. A Brotherhood of Steel convoy gets ambushed there near a supply route. Civilians and raiders are desperate and starving. You roll in and save the driver, Pilot Christian. Then you fight through the raiders and wipe the place clean with extermination squads. Surviving civilians get sent to labor camps except for one librarian, Philip Wilson, but his fate after the cleanup is never really revealed. This is kind of the nature of Fallout Tactics, as you see. You arrive on a map and usually clear it of enemies with little tidbits of lore. It's why these specific locations will all seem fairly similar. Malden was part of the greater Boston area, and in the Fallout universe it sat near key pre-war facilities. Most famously, it was close to the Malden Middle School, which doubled as a military recruiting center and a National Guard training site. But the school wasn't just for kids. It was repurposed into a pre-war military asset and a vault. It being so close to Boston also meant that Malden was tied into the city's wider pre-war infrastructure and supply network. When the bombs fell, Malden was in the blast radius of strikes on Boston. The condition of its ruins in Fallout 4 makes it pretty clear that it took heavy damage. Radiation levels in the area vary, with some spots like the Malden Center Station and surrounding neighborhoods heavily decayed. Plus, they're overrun with post-war hazards. After the bombs, Malden became part of the Commonwealth's dangerous no man's land. It's a patchwork of collapsed buildings, feral ghoul nests, and faction outposts. The Malden Center area is occupied by raiders, and the old Malden Middle School is now overrun with ferals. Then, of course, you have the nearby Malden drainage system, which is full of mirelurks. There's no organized settlement here anymore, just pockets of danger that scavengers and mercenaries pass through if they have to, and avoid if they can.
Morgantown thrived as a lively riverside city and the proud home of Vault-Tec University. Students from across the country came to study here, and its monorail connected the airport, university, and both ends of the bustling downtown. Shops, bars, and businesses catered to a diverse mix of miners, hunters, military personnel, and travelers. But beneath the prosperity, challenges were brewing. Rising land values drove up rent, and new technologies disrupted local businesses. Still, the city endured, its energy fueled by its academic heartbeat and steady influx of visitors. The bombs changed everything. Chaos gripped Morgantown in the aftermath, and Police Chief Mayfield imposed a harsh curfew, even firing on students accused of looting. Surviving Vault-Tec University students formed rival gangs, the rooftop dominating Roof House and the street claiming Street House, each vying for control over what little remained. Shortages of Radaway turned skirmishes deadly, with radiation slowly killing off the weakest. Turf wars, starvation, and exposure eroded what little order was left, leaving the once proud city split between desperation and decay. Morgantown briefly found new purpose after the Christmas flood of 2082, when the responders, led by Maria, reclaimed the airport as their headquarters. They established various centers, stocked supply caches, and converted Mama Dolce's food processing into a food production facility, even fostering trade routes to Harpers Ferry under Brotherhood of Steel protection. But the city's revival was short-lived. By 2097, the Scorched had overrun Morgantown, wiping out the responders entirely. Now, the streets are filled with feral ghouls, scorched, and the remnants of a city that once embodied opportunity. If you wander to the city today, Morgantown is a place where history lingers in every shattered lecture hall and rusting monorail track.
Nahant was a coastal town in Massachusetts. It was home to the Nahant Oceanological Society, a research facility focused on marine biology. The group studied marine ecosystems and local species, and the environmental changes in the pre-war Atlantic. and it's nice to see a city focused on scientific research rather than industry or military operations. When the bombs fell, Nahant's fate isn't really described in detail, but its location on the edge of Boston Harbor put it pretty close to the nuclear strikes on the city. A lot of the buildings collapsed or eroded, and the shoreline is littered with all kinds of debris. The Nahant Oceanological Society building itself is still standing though, but it's damaged and abandoned. Nowadays, Nahant is a dangerous little stretch of the Commonwealth. The area is full of ruined homes, fishing shacks, and the remains of that society. Raiders and feral ghouls sometimes wander around the area, and the surrounding waters are infested with mirelurks. There's no sign of any organized settlement, and the pre-war research center has been reduced to little more than a looted shell. Natick was a suburban town in Massachusetts. In Fallout, it was the site of the Natick Banks, a neighborhood with residential housing, a playground, and a small community setup. There's no records of vaults or secret experiments or any other weird pre-war projects tied directly to Natick, so its pre-war life appears to have been pretty ordinary by Fallout standards. After the bombs though, Natick becomes a hazardous part of the Commonwealth. The ruins of Natick Banks are overrun with supermutants, and they've turned it into one of their strongholds. The streets are filled with makeshift barricades and wrecked vehicles. Just another city in the Commonwealth area that is pretty much a hellhole. Common for the Commonwealth. Nelson was a small mining town in Nevada. It was home to the Vicky and Vance Casino's supply lines and had gold mining operations in nearby hills. Its main claim to Fallout-specific history comes from its location in the El Dorado area, where pre-war mining still had some presence. Beyond that, no major military or scientific facilities are tied to it in any official lore. Nelson isn't really mentioned as a direct target, being far from major military installations or big cities like Las Vegas no doubt spared it from the full blast. Any remaining mining operations though would have shut down as society broke apart. After the bombs, Nelson is under the control of Caesar's Legion. It's been taken from the New California Republic after a Legion assault, which left the NCR troops crucified outside the town as a warning. Under Legion control, Nelson serves as a forward position against NCR forces in the Mojave. It's manned by a small garrison of Legion soldiers who enforce the Legion's strict and violent rule over the area. Nipton started life as a regular little railroad stop back in 1905. Built for gold miners and ranchers near the California-Nevada line. It was called Nipino Camp at first, then changed to Nipton around 1910 when railroad companies merged. Over time, it turned into a dusty tourist stop. People could rest, resupply, park their RVs, and even try their luck on the state lottery. Great War hit Nipton like most other spots in the wasteland, but the buildings didn't get wiped out. The town still stood, roads, stores, and its hotels all survived the initial blasts. No big story here. Years roll by and Nipton gets seedier. By the late 200s, under Mayor Joseph Stein, the town became a shady pit for gamblers, thieves, and even prostitutes. Basically anyone with caps to spend. He made a deal with Caesar's Legion to hand over both NCR soldiers and powder gangers in exchange for 8,000 caps. But that trade went sideways big time. Enter Vulpus Inculta of the Caesar's Legion. He shows up disguised and lures everyone in, and before they know it, it's a twisted lottery, where the losers get decapitated, crucified, enslaved, or crippled, and only one person will walk away free. Mayor Stein ended up meeting a fiery fate on a pile of burning tires. Ish. Now the town's pretty much a walking nightmare. The roads are lined with crucified corpses, heads on spikes, and burning piles. A showpiece of Legion cruelty. You wander through and meet boxcars in the general store. The only sane voice who's left, telling you the whole story through a quest. Before the bombs, Ogden, Utah was a small but significant city in the shadow of the Wasatch Mountains. It would later become the foundation for New Canaan, but the settlement itself didn't exist before the war. Ogden was a lot like its real-world counterpart. Its location along key trail and highway routes meant it was well connected to Salt Lake City and other regional centers. When the bombs dropped, Ogden was far enough from major military or industrial targets that it likely avoided a direct nuclear strike. That doesn't mean it was safe. Fallout drifted across Utah just like everywhere else, and the collapse of the government and supply chains hit small cities hard. Without major strategic value, Ogden may have been spared the instant annihilation that hit bigger cities, but it still suffered from the slow grind of starvation, resource shortages, and lawlessness that all spread in the aftermath. After the war, the ruins of Ogden became the starting point for a community. New Canaan was founded there centuries later by Mormon missionaries, led by a man named Mordecai. He preserved the religious teachings and values of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The community became known for its stability, education, and emphasis on helping others in the wasteland, qualities that made it both respected and eventually a target. New Canaan thrived on trade and diplomacy, becoming a cultural and spiritual hub in the region, with lots of its people traveling far beyond Utah to spread their beliefs and aid struggling settlements. This peace didn't last forever. By the time of the Honest Hearts DLC, New Canaan had been destroyed by the Whitelegs tribe. They were armed and encouraged by Caesar's legion. The attack left the city burned and its people scattered. Survivors like Daniel and even Joshua Graham, who's the burned man, carry on the New Canaanite way of life in exile. But the physical settlement of New Canaan is left in ruins basically. I suppose nothing ever lasts in this world. Osceola, hopefully I'm saying that right, has become a post-war stronghold, specifically for the base of Gamoran's super mutant army in Fallout Tactics. The Brotherhood of Steel sends in the warrior and squad to blow up the place and kill Gamoran and rescue any survivors. That's essentially all we get. Mutant threats, Brotherhood assault, and a hardened compound turned battlefield. The mission ends with the base cleared and Gamoran dead, but nothing more is said about what happens to Osceola after that.
This one is quick. Philippi, tucked within the Toxic Valley, holds a quiet but significant place in both real and in-game history. On June 3, 1861, it was the site of the first organized land action of the American Civil War, known as the Battle of Philippi. A Union victory that, while often considered more of a skirmish, marked the opening clash of the Western Virginia campaign. Today, the Philippi Battlefield Cemetery is simply a reminder of that day, commemorated by a plaque honoring the soldiers who fought there. In Fallout 76, Philippi exists as an unmarked location, its digital counterpart based directly on the real West Virginia town where history first echoed across the hills. Other than that, there's not much more to cover here.
Peoria, just like Osceola, becomes a stronghold in Fallout Tactics. A Wachudu tribe lives on an old pre-war bunker full of fusion batteries. The locals think the batteries are magical gateways to the afterlife, and the bunker is guarded by turrets and overrun by rad scorpions and giant roaches. The Brotherhood once again sends in a squad to fetch those batteries. Depending on how you handle the defense system, you either save the villagers or trigger the turrets to attack them. If you spare them, the tribal elder thanks you by giving you the 4th battery. Primm might not be the glitzy strip, but for the travelers heading up the I-15, it's the first taste of neon before New Vegas, and for some, the last place they see before limping home broke. Pre-war, as in today, it was Clark County's poor man's Vegas, a resort stop with cheap thrills and a couple of themed casinos. They also had a cool roller coaster kids would take pride in riding growing up. Bison Steve Casino had El Diablo, the Mojave's largest and most rickety roller coaster, which is actually a real roller coaster at the Buffalo Bills called Desperado. Then we had the Vicky and Vance Casino that was based on the legend of the Bonnie and Clyde style outlaw couple. After the Great War, Primm survived. The NCR's expansion into the Mojave brought caravans, couriers, and soldiers through its streets, reviving it as a small but busy trade hub. It kept its budget Vegas identity alive, a place for those who couldn't make it to the Strip but still wanted a hand of cards and a stiff drink. Unlike Nipton, it kept its reputation for safety thanks to a functioning sheriff's office. That all collapsed in 2281. A breakout of the NCR correctional facility sent waves of violent convicts down the highway. Primm's sheriff and his wife were murdered in their sleep, the deputy taken hostage in the Bison Steed, and the town was effectively under siege. The remaining townsfolk decided to hold up in the Vicky and Vance. Supplies in hand, but no manpower to retake the streets. Traders like Samuel and Michelle cut their losses and moved operations closer to the Strip. The NCR recognized Primm's strategic value, especially with Nipton lost, and they set up a small outpost on the edge of the town under Lieutenant Hayes. But Hayes was undermanned, outgunned, and painfully aware that without reinforcements, Primm would remain in criminal hands. His troops held the line to keep the convicts from pushing south, but the heart of Primm was left to rot. For the courier, Primm becomes a turning point. You can decide the settlement's fate, restore order with an NCR-appointed sheriff, reprogram the ever-cheerful Primm Slim to enforce the law, or free an ex-NCR convict named Myers to run the place with a frontier justice approach. It's hard to say what Primm is now, because all those choices will change its outcome. I wonder if we'll see it in the show, and what exactly happened to it.
Before the Great War, Summersville was a peaceful lakeside community of just over 700 residents, known for its small-town charm and efficient automated voting system. Multiple voting tents and booths dotted the streets in preparation for upcoming elections, while commercial spaces like the ice cream parlor and laundromat catered to locals. The town was neatly divided into 4 quarters, with the northern half overlooking the reservoir and featuring a church, graveyard, and residential areas, including the home of VTU doctoral candidate Elia. who kept an experimental schematic crucial to the quest, trade secrets. Rooftops were already home to makeshift camps, and civic pride was evident with tattered American flags flying outside the voting tents. After the Great War, Summersville's tranquil atmosphere dissolved into danger. By 2086, the streets saw bloody conflict when Order of Mysteries member Allison Long was betrayed and killed by her ally Olivia Rivers during a raider ambush. In the years that followed, the settlement became a hotspot for violence and was eventually seized by the ruthless Blood Eagles in 2103. Today, its divided quarters are filled with sniper nests, overgrown playgrounds, and scavenged workbenches, while looters pick through the remains of once busy businesses. Its real-world namesake, Summersville, West Virginia, shares the same lakeside setting, though in Appalachia's wasteland, the lake now borders a town defined more by bloodshed than beauty. Founded in 1824, Sutton thrived before the Great War as a hub for the timber industry and regional transport, with railroads, Interstate 59, and a nearby train station keeping the small town connected. That peaceful industry gave way to chaos when the Pleasant Valley Raiders claimed it as a fortified outpost, walling off downtown and turning its storefronts into a stronghold. In one of its darkest chapters, a raider leader used the church to run a doomsday cult, convincing desperate survivors to surrender their possessions before killing them all in a mass poisoning. The raiders themselves were eventually wiped out, leaving Sutton a hollowed shell of its former self, its homes and businesses now patrolled only by scavengers and the scorched. Today, Sutton's mix of boarded up houses, looted storefronts, and hidden workbenches offers scattered signs of life, but mostly as a stopover for travelers. The Vault 76 Overseer's childhood home stands here too, adding to the Fallout lore. Main Street's businesses, once a pharmacy, liquor store, and bookstore, are partially blockaded but still hold loot, while the nearby Red Rocket Station, raider camps, and church tell stories of both community and cruelty. In the real world, Sutton, West Virginia remains a small Appalachian town, but in the wasteland, it's more of a weird hodgepodge of faith and survival and violence commingling. Founded on February 4th, 2042 by Watauga Inc. and funded by Atomic Mining Services, Watauga was envisioned as the city of the future, built atop the site of a real-world ghost town in West Virginia, which is how it made it on the list. Designed to be fully automated, civil services were handled entirely by Robco and General Atomics robots, while the only human authority, the mayor, was randomly selected and assisted by the Mayoral Artificial Intelligence Assistant, MAIA. Despite its sleek promise, the city quickly fell victim to elitism, skyrocketing property prices, and corporate gatekeeping. Residency required approval from Robco management, who often denied applications even from their own full-time employees. Discontent brewed until Robco developer Scott Turner founded the Free Watauga People's Party, ultimately sabotaging the city's robotic services in an event known as Operation Free Watauga, an act that triggered violent chaos just one day before the Great War. In its heyday, Watauga boasted towering skyscrapers, a monorail system, corporate headquarters for AMS, and a bustling shopping plaza. Yet beneath this shine, the city's automation brought mass unemployment, and its wealthy residents voted to limit public services, further isolating the poor. Turner's sabotage, intended to drive evacuation, instead led to the city's emergency robots to attack citizens, cutting short Mayor Barbara Elizabeth's plans to negotiate a truce. When the bombs fell on October 23rd, Turner, racked with guilt, left behind the instructions on how to pacify the corrupted systems. In the post-war decades, the city remained a dangerous blend of scorched ruins and functioning robots, its streets patrolled by assaultrons, protectrons, and the occasional scorched beast overhead. Today, Watauga stands as one of Appalachia's most imposing urban landscapes, with its AMS tower dominating the skyline and its dense network of skybridges, monorail stations, and commercial districts still intact. The Central Administrative Zone links to residential Watauga estates, while the Northeast Commercial District houses brands like Hubris Comics, Super Duper Mart, and Slocum's Joe. A crashed vertibot scars the AMS Plaza, and scorched beast nests cling to high-rises, showcasing the city's long abandonment. While the in-game Watauga is a sprawling metropolis, its real-world namesake in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, is a tiny unincorporated community along the Greenbrier River Trail. Quiet, rural, and worlds away from the automated dystopia its digital counterpart became.
Before the bombs, Washington, D.C. was still the nation's capital, but in Fallout's timeline, it had an even heavier military and research presence than in real history. Government facilities were stockpiling weapons and advanced technology, including prototype power armor and projects like Liberty Prime that were tied to the escalating war with China. The Pentagon remained fully active, housing command centers and classified military programs. The National Mall and Capitol Hill were still operating as the political heart of the country, though wartime rationing and security checkpoints were a regular part of life. Civilian neighborhoods and businesses continued on, but with a constant backdrop of military drills and propaganda urging loyalty and readiness for nuclear conflict. On October 23, 2077, multiple nuclear warheads struck Washington, D.C., delivering direct hits to central government districts. The blasts leveled major landmarks, with much of the mall, the White House, and the surrounding federal buildings either vaporized or left in ruin. The shockwaves ripped through entire neighborhoods, and radiation blanketed the city. The Potomac River became heavily contaminated, making one of the region's main water sources dangerous to touch. The bombing didn't leave much standing, and what wasn't flattened by the initial blast was consumed by firestorms that raged in the hours afterward. The destruction wasn't isolated to just DC's core. Surrounding suburbs and military installations were also targeted, crippling the region's ability to organize any kind of coordinated survival effort. The National Archives, the Museum of History, and other important repositories of American culture were damaged or destroyed, leaving fragments of history scattered in the rubble. The Pentagon itself, while hit, remained partially intact, its deeper structures surviving the blast, something that would prove important in the centuries to come. After the war, the area came to be known as the Capital Wasteland. Super mutants created from experiments in Vault 87 roamed the streets and turned sections of the city into their territory. Raiders carved out strongholds in the ruins, and ghouls haunted the underground tunnels. A few fortified communities managed to survive. That includes Megaton, Rivet City, which was built inside the remains of an aircraft carrier, and of course Tenpenny Tower, a pre-war luxury building turned into a walled fortress. The Brotherhood of Steel set up their headquarters in the remains of the Pentagon, using it as a base to collect and protect pre-war technology. DC's ruins remained rich in valuable tech, but also incredibly dangerous to navigate. The metro system provided underground travel routes that were just as treacherous as the streets above. Landmarks like the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, and Jefferson Memorial stood as hollow shells of their former selves, either damaged beyond recognition or repurposed by whatever faction could hold them. While the city never regained anything close to its pre-war glory, it stayed a focal point for anyone chasing the last scraps of America's lost power.
Welch, located in the ash heap region of Appalachia, was already struggling before the Great War as automation from Hornwright Industrial Mining Company displaced human workers. By 2077, unemployment was rising sharply, and Ballot Measure 6 threatened to make full automation mandatory. Atomic Mining Services attempted to seize the opportunity by promising economic revival through the extraction of ultracite, but their methods were ruthless. After an earthquake damaged homes, AMS evicted residents whose land contained the valuable ore, citing resource rights. The townspeople fought back, prompting the National Guard to intervene. These tensions were still raw when the bombs fell, and in the chaos, part of the USSA Deep Sleep spacecraft crashed into Welch's streets, leaving the remains of 3 astronauts separated from their commander Sophia. Post-war, Welch became a scarred wasteland, its buildings cracked and collapsing, its western edge torn apart by shifting ground. Fires smolder endlessly, mole miners roam the streets, and ash roses grow in the cracked pavement. The Central District holds remnants of a gas station, post office, bakery, and pawn shop with scattered workbenches and a U-Minute vending machine. Wooden catwalks connect ruined storefronts, while Duchess's hideout, marked by a Z. Wilson mailbox, sits in a collapsed building on the town's outskirts. Though Fallout 76's version of Welch is an ash-choked ruin, it is based on the real-world town of Welch, West Virginia, which is a small McDowell County community once central to the state's coal mining industry. You're probably wondering where the rest of Fallout's pre-war cities are today. There's plenty of other Fallout destinations we plan on covering in a part 2 vid, so make sure you sub for that. Thank you guys for watching and commenting, we really do appreciate it. And remember, enjoyed time is never wasted time, and we'll see you in the next.